The story begins with a group of people from the Luther tribe awaiting the arrival of guests from another tribe. The Luther tribe is led by a man named Tane, known for his wisdom and love of peace. After some time, the expected tribe arrives, the Blackwood tribe, who were once enemies of the Luther tribe before the two made peace. At that moment, Tane inquires why the chief of the Blackwood tribe did not come himself. Weerepa, the son of the Blackwood chief, explains that his father is occupied and that he has come in his stead. It is revealed that the Blackwood tribe has come to visit the graves of their ancestors, who died long ago on Luther land. Tane then leads them to the burial site. Upon nearing the cemetery, Tane explains that the Luther tribe holds the ancestors of the Blackwood tribe in high regard, so much so that they have never hunted in the area surrounding the graves. Shortly after, Tane invites Weerepa to dismount and pay his respects to his ancestors near a cave. At first, everything proceeds smoothly until Weerepa suddenly urinates on the sacred ground, intending to frame the Luther tribe for disrespecting his ancestors. Unbeknownst to him, Tane's son, Hongi, secretly witnesses Weerepa's deceitful act. Quickly, Hongi throws a stone at Weerepa and rushes off to report the incident to Tane. Unfortunately, Hongi is not fast enough and is captured by Weerepa. Unexpectedly, Weerepa twists the truth, claiming that it was Hongi who desecrated the graves by urinating on them. In response, Hongi swears that it was Weerepa who committed the act and that he merely caught him in the act. Weerepa, refusing to admit his guilt, insists that he would never dishonor his own ancestors. Over this incident, Weerepa vows to report the Luther tribe to his father, ensuring that war will inevitably follow. Tane, as the chief of the Luther tribe, is left confused about who is truly at fault. However, Hongi suddenly offers to be executed, so long as the matter is not prolonged. Just as Hongi is about to be killed, Weerepa declares that even if Hongi is executed, he will still report the Luther tribe to his father. As a result, Hongi is spared, while Weerepa and his men hastily depart. Back at home, Tane tells Hongi that he believes him and that Weerepa was merely looking for trouble. Tane then shares that to the east lies a forest known as the Forest of Death. Anyone who enters it is said to perish, as it is rumored to be inhabited by a legendary monster. Tane is certain that Weerepa and his men will take a shortcut through the Forest of Death on their way home. That night, as everyone sleeps, the Luther tribe is brutally attacked. Hongi is kicked by an enemy and falls into a ravine. It turns out that the attackers are Weerepa and his men, who had decided not to return home. Caught completely unprepared, the Luther tribe is left defenseless. Even Tane, the chief, is cornered by them. At that moment, Weerepa reveals that his goal from the beginning was to annihilate the Luther tribe. Now, he only needs his father's permission to establish a new tribe on Luther land. Hearing this, Tane can only curse Weerepa's actions before he is ultimately killed. Shortly after, one of Weerepa's men reports that Hongi is missing. Weerepa dismisses the matter, assuming that Hongi likely perished in the ravine. The next day, Hongi is revealed to be alive, and he hurriedly makes his way home. Upon arriving, he is shocked to find that all the men of the Luther tribe have been slaughtered without exception. One of the surviving villagers blames Hongi, believing that he lied about the incident at Weerepa's ancestors' graves. Hongi then heads to his house to gather weapons, as he is determined to seek revenge. Before leaving, he leaves a message with his sister, asking her to tell the truth about him if he does not return. The scene then shifts to Weerepa's group, who have now reached a crossroads on their way home. Weerepa, eager to take a shortcut, convinces his men to pass through the Forest of Death, as it will save them 5 days of travel. However, one of Weerepa's men speaks up, warning that anyone who dares to enter the Forest of Death will inevitably meet their end. The man also recounts the legend of a fearsome warrior monster said to dwell within the forest. According to the tale, this monster once slaughtered every member of its own tribe and is renowned for its lethality. Weerepa, brimming with arrogance, dismisses the warning and orders his men to proceed through the forest. Not long after they depart, Hongi arrives at the same spot where Weerepa's group had just passed. Without hesitation, Hongi also enters the Forest of Death, But his goal now is to find the legendary warrior. By evening, Hongi encounters a woman who urgently warns him to leave before the warrior monster kills him. Hongi responds that he has come specifically to meet the monster. Soon after, he enters a small hut, where he finally comes face to face with the warrior he seeks. The monster's true name is revealed to be Makaware. At that moment, Makaware demands to know why Hongi has come, threatening to kill and devour him. In response, Hongi explains that he is pursuing Wirepua's group, who massacred his tribe and arrogantly entered the Forest of Death. He pleads with Makaware to help him exact revenge on Wirepua's group. Unexpectedly, the woman who had warned Hongi earlier appears. She is Makaware's wife. She urges Makaware to assist Hongi as a way to atone for his past sins, as Makaware had once slaughtered his own tribe. Makaware, who deeply respects his wife, finally agrees to help Hongi. Meanwhile, Wirepua's group is seen resting. One of his men mentions finding a lizard in his bag, which their tribe believes to be a bad omen. The man is convinced they are cursed for daring to enter the Forest of Death. Wirepua, hearing this, merely smirks, dismissing such superstitions. The next day, two of Wirepua's men suggest heading south to leave the forest, but Wirepua ignores them and orders the rest of his group to continue through the forest. The two men who wanted to leave are promptly cast out by Wirepua. Elsewhere, Makaware leads Hongi on a shortcut, running swiftly to catch up with Wirepua's group. Soon, they encounter the two men who had been cast out. Makaware quickly chases down one of them, effortlessly killing him, while Hongi pursues the other. When the man realizes it is Hongi chasing him, he turns to fight. During the fight, Hongi manages to corner him, but struggles to deliver the final blow. Observing this, Makaware steps in to demonstrate how to swiftly finish an opponent. That night, Makaware is seen eating the flesh of Wirepua's man. He explains to Hongi that while he has some skill in combat, there are crucial techniques he must learn. Makaware proceeds to teach Hongi advanced tactics, such as provoking an opponent to break their focus and identifying weak points to quickly incapacitate them. Satisfied with the training, Makaware tells Hongi to rest, as they will resume their hunt for Wirepua's group the next day. The following morning, Hongi and Makaware set off again, running swiftly through the forest. By midday, Wirepua's group decides to take a break. Seizing the opportunity, Makaware kills one of Wirepua's men and instructs Hongi to wait in the forest while he handles the rest. Makaware then confronts Wirepua's group, engaging in a fierce one-against-many battle. Meanwhile, one of Wirepua's men who had been trailing Hongi finally catches up to him. Hongi challenges him to a duel and, thanks to Makaware's training, manages to defeat him. The scene shifts back to Makaware, who is still fighting Wirepua's group. Though outnumbered and growing weary, Makaware holds his ground. Just as he is about to be overwhelmed, Hongi arrives in the nick of time to save him. Together, Hongi and Makaware fight side by side against the remaining members of Wirepua's group. Wirepua, realizing they may not be able to defeat Makaware and Hongi, orders some of his men to hold them off while he and the others flee. The battle rages on until Makaware and Hongi finally defeat the men who had tried to stop them. After the intense battle, Makaware, utterly exhausted, suddenly collapses. That night, Hongi tends to Makaware, using a traditional herbal remedy passed down from his ancestors. Several hours later, Makaware finally regains consciousness. Once he has recovered slightly, Makaware begins to share his story. He reveals that he once slaughtered every member of his own tribe. This horrific act was committed because Makaware had failed in a mission assigned to him by his tribe. It was revealed that Makaware's tribe had tasked him with expanding their territory by annihilating neighboring tribes. However, Makaware failed in this mission and was blamed by his own people. As a result, Makaware and his wife were sentenced to execution, but he turned the tables and killed his tribe members first. The hut they are currently staying in once belonged to his tribe's chief. The next day, Wirepua's group is seen resuming their journey, though their progress is slow due to his injuries from the previous battle. Meanwhile, Hongi and Makaware also continue their pursuit. At one point, they encounter a beautiful woman and her two men from another tribe. The woman asks what they are searching for, and Hongi explains their mission. After hearing their story, the woman invites them to camp together for the night, as darkness is approaching. That night, while Hongi is deep in sleep, he is suddenly awakened by the sound of commotion. He discovers that Makaware is engaged in a fight with the woman, and her 2 men lie dead. With his unmatched skill, Makaware easily kills the woman. Hongi, arriving at the scene, is shocked and furious, believing that Makaware had no right to kill the woman and her men. In response, Makaware explains that the woman and her group had come to hunt him down, intending to take control of the Forest of Death. They had planned to kill Makaware in his sleep, but he had turned the tables. After hearing this explanation, Hongi finally understands. The following day, as Hongi and Makaware continue their journey, they spot a plume of smoke rising from a hilltop. Makaware realizes that Weerapa's group must be there. His suspicion proves correct. When Weerapa wakes up, he is furious to find that his men have lit a bonfire, as it would reveal their location to their enemies. Weerapa berates them for their foolishness, but the tension is quickly diffused by another member of his group. They decide to leave the fort, especially since Weerapa's injury has begun to heal. However, as they are leaving the fort, Hongi and Makaware ambush them. Realizing they are outmatched, Weerapa orders his men to retreat back into the fort. Weerapa then tries to provoke Hongi and Makaware into entering the fort, even taunting Hongi by displaying the severed head of his father and mocking him. Fortunately, Makaware calms Hongi down and pulls him away. Makaware then gathers dry wood, tying it together as part of a plan to destroy Weerapa's group. It is revealed that the fort currently occupied by Weerapa's group once belonged to Makaware. Meanwhile, inside the fort, one of Weerapa's men blames him for their dire situation. He accuses Weerapa of being an incompetent leader, as they have been trapped without food or water since the previous day. When the man continues to mock him, Weerapa kills him in a fit of rage. An hour later, one of the men accidentally discovers a chest filled with weapons. They're convinced that with these weapons, they can defeat Makaware and Hongi. Elsewhere, Makaware and Hongi are seen carrying bundles of firewood, which they throw into the fort. However, Weerapa's group, now armed with the weapons they found, retaliates by hurling spears. Realizing the danger, Makaware signals Hongi to retreat and reconsider their strategy. As they hide and observe the fort, Hongi suddenly notices Weerapa's group fleeing into the forest. Without hesitation, Hongi and Makaware give chase, determined to end the hunt once and for all. However, as Hongi approaches the fort, he spots his father's severed head still lying there. Overcome with emotion, he decides to retrieve it. But as soon as Hongi steps inside, he realizes it's a trap. Moments later, Weerapa and one of his men ambush him, leading to a fierce 2-against-1 battle. Meanwhile, Makaware notices that Hongi is no longer following him. Just as Makaware turns back to find Hongi, he is attacked from below the ground, leaving his abdomen impaled. At the same time, the remaining members of Weerapa's group begin to surround him. Despite his severe injury, Makaware fights back with unwavering determination. After managing to defeat his attackers, he rushes back to the fort to save Hongi. Inside the fort, Hongi is struggling to hold his own against Weerapa and his last remaining man. Just as the situation seems dire, Makaware arrives and immediately challenges Weerapa's man. Despite his grievous wound, Makaware fights valiantly, though he is clearly at a disadvantage. Makaware is pushed to his limits multiple times, but eventually summons the last of his strength to emerge victorious. Exhausted and bleeding, Makaware stumbles toward Hongi, who is now cornered by Weerapa. Unfortunately, Weerapa notices Makaware approaching from behind and swiftly turns to attack him. In his weakened state, Makaware is no match for Weerapa, who delivers the final blow. Witnessing Makaware's death, Hongi is filled with rage and resumes his relentless fight against Weerapa. The battle is fierce, but Hongi eventually gains the upper hand, pinning Weerapa down with his weapon pressed against him. Weerapa, resigned to his fate, expects death. However, Hongi chooses to spare him. Hongi explains that killing Weerapa would only lead to an endless cycle of revenge, as Wirepa's father would surely seek retribution. Instead, Hongi declares that Wirepa and his tribe now owe him a life debt. With that, he lets Wirepa go. After Wirepa leaves, Hongi approaches Makaware, who, to his surprise, is still alive but barely clinging to life. In his final moments, Makaware thanks Hongi. He feels that, thanks to Hongi, he can now die in peace, knowing he has a place in the afterlife. As the film concludes, Hongi prepares to return home, determined to rebuild his tribe and ensure its survival. The end. Moral lesson from the story: always check where you pee, because if you blame others for your own mess, you might end up running through a monster-filled forest. And remember, revenge is like a bad haircut. It might feel good at first, but it's hard to fix later.